Greetings, and thank you for joining us for another SANS ICS Concept Overview. I'm Don C. Weber of Cutaway Security and a certified SANS instructor. In this concept overview, we are joined by Aaron Sawyer, an information security professional with a background in maritime operations. Aaron and I discuss some of his observations about the maritime industry and some of the upcoming automation capabilities that might be a concern. If you enjoyed this video and the topics we cover on the SANS ICS Concept Overviews, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment if you have a question about this topic or suggestions for future content. Greetings. For this installment of the ICS Concepts, we're joined by Aaron Sawyer. He's here to talk to us about some of his ICS information security experiences in the maritime sector. He's developed this presentation, Tales from the Deep. Aaron, before you get started, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I graduated from Massachusetts Maritime Academy in 2012 with my third engineer's license. I then went and sailed up until 2018, specializing in deep sea, so international trade. I then retired from the industry and went back to school, got my bachelor's in cybersecurity from the University of Maine at Augusta. I now work as a cyber software engineer, and I currently hold some GIAC certifications. I have GSEC, GCIH, GCIA, and I recently got my expert penetration tester. So I am not an expert in industrial control system cybersecurity, especially not when it comes to the maritime industry. However, I do offer a unique perspective where I've been on the operations side and now I've been on the cybersecurity side as well. So it's interesting that way.
Absolutely. I mean, my experience on the, from the Marine Corps and, going from ships to ships, we were on some of the maritime ships, some of the supply ships that were assigned to the Navy, but they're all crewed by, I guess they're mariner. Would you call yourselves mariners or I can't remember exactly what the term was.
Yeah, we'd be either merchant sailors or merchant mariners.
Oh, merchant mariners. Yes, yes. So great, very, very experienced. And some of those ships were immaculate. I was really surprised. I mean, you look at the ship in the background right there, a little bit rusty on the outside and stuff like that. But when you got down into the engine room, at least on the ships that are on, I was on just very, very clean.
So next slide.
I guess so. Oh, gotta focus it. There we go.
Marine industrial control systems, it's a lot like shoreside industrial control systems. You have a lot of the same equipment. You're still dealing with diesel generators, pumps, turbines, boilers, a lot of the watchstanding duties. Your night watchman at a shoreside power plant is going to have very similar duties to a night watchman out at sea, which for the most part is make sure nothing catches fire and make sure that everything runs smoothly. However,
now, hang on just a second. So when you say shoreside, is that off the ship, basically at the dock facility?
So shoreside power plant would be any normal power generation plant that you would find really anywhere.
Okay.
So a normal power plant that produces electricity for like a municipality or yeah.
Okay, so but that's what you're referring to here is that shoreside stuff that is not actually on the ship.
Correct. I'm not referring to shipping terminals or anything like that. I'm really referring to like shoreside power plants.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I appreciate that.
So saying that, marine industrial control systems are almost nothing like shoreside industrial control systems. There's some very different equipment. So actually in the previous slide, I didn't mention it, but that was a bit of steering gear that was being shown. And what a steering gear does is it controls the rudder. So it controls the whole direction of the ship, and it's really driven by very large hydraulic pumps. There's also dynamic, depending on where you work, there might be dynamic positioning equipment, which is designed to, it's a series of sensors, which is connected directly to the engines, the engine controls, as well as the rudder and maybe like a bow thruster, which is like a turbo prop up at the front of the ship, which can really affect where the ship is. And the idea with the dynamic positioning system is to keep the ship uh, on station to hold a position very accurately. And so it's very useful for things like bunkering with oil platforms or other drill ships. You also have cargo controls. So if you are a tanker vessel, you would be taking on bunker C, which is very heavy fuel oil or like a lighter fuel oil. That ship that was in the first image of the Who Am I slide, that was a diesel tanker, and we went island hopping in the South Pacific. You also have ballasting controls, which are very similar in nature, which is to have counterweight inside of these giant tanks in the ship, and you fill them with seawater in order to make sure that the ship is stable as it's going through the waves.
So these
You
are all
also,
pieces of equipment that would be connected to the network?
potentially, yes.
Okay.
So especially dynamic positioning, navigation equipment, and potentially ballasting controls um, could be on the network. Um, there's also some there's different cultures too. So you're dealing in very isolating environments. In fact, the most isolated place in the world, furthest from any population center, is in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Um, Also, unlike shoreside power plant operators, merchant sailors have this kind of oral tradition and culture that has been passed down for a very long time and doesn't really represent what it used to, but has been around since before recorded history, some facets of it. So there's some real ingrained hierarchies about what the role of, say, the captain is, and how how much power he has on his own vessel, and it's a lot. um, you'll also see weird maintenance cycles, so much longer maintenance cycles. I don't know, Don, correct me if I'm wrong, but you wouldn't go, say, 5 years without an overhaul at like a shoreside power plant.
I mean, uh, as far as overhauls go, they're constantly doing maintenance, and certainly they've got a maintenance cycle, but they expect that equipment. That maintenance cycle is just to replace anything that is has a specific issue. Certainly they'll address it as it comes up, but they expect those things to 10, 15 years. So depending on the sector, food and beverage sectors, they might rotate things out a little bit faster from a like management server and aspect, but the actual devices that themselves, the sensors and so forth, those tend to last a little longer. So similar to if you're saying that the maintenance is on a longer life cycle, absolutely the other sectors are as well.
Oh, okay. Um, so, yeah, my understanding for what completely tearing down the engines and rebuilding them is that's only done really in shipyard, and you might hit shipyard once every 5 years or so. So, generally, they're not redesigning everything; they're just replacing what's already there. There is day-to-day preventative maintenance and sometimes emergency repairs that happen, but the really deep stuff is in shipyard. Also, you have hazardous operating conditions, and then poor designs can create those hazardous conditions, and also traditional hazards that you might guess at by the fact that your whole machine shop is moving like this when you're underway. But most importantly, and most related to our talk, is the ad hoc air gap of patchwork networks. Everything is kind of stitched together. It's not, if it wasn't originally designed to be networked and it needs to be networked, it's going to get networked, but not necessarily securely. Next slide. So the Code of Federal Regulations is put down by the Department of Transportation. It's enforced by the U.S. Coast Guard. It deals with the laws and regulations, particularly dealing with safety and also what is and isn't allowed to occur on a ship as far as U.S. vessels are concerned. The CFRs particularly deal with vessels in U.S. territorial waters or U.S. flagged vessels also have to comply to the Code of Federal Regulations. There was a recent edit to it. I mean, they're updating them all the time, but there was Executive Order 13636, which was signed in on 2014. And that basically stated that cybersecurity is an issue that needs to be addressed by the Department of Transportation. And they came out with a framework that's based very heavily on NIST 853. So they did consult ICS Cert, and they did go with a very robust framework. However, there were sections that are missing. Now, I'm not a legal scholar, but I did look through this framework pretty briefly, and I didn't see any mention of navigational charts. I didn't see any mention of keeping hard copies of technical manuals, which is something that I'm going to bring up later. But the U.S. Coast Guard claims that this framework falls under 33 CFR section 105, 106, so dealing with vessel security plans.
So, going back to the hard copy thing, what is your concern there? It's you brought up that there's no section dealing with that. Are you concerned about that things are going digital and those hard copies are going away and they won't be available if something is deleted, or if the assets are inaccessible, or something else?
Actually, you hit the nail right on the head there. So technical manuals are expensive to purchase hard copies for and expensive to maintain. You've got to make sure that they're not falling apart. But also, navigational charts are also very expensive to purchase. You have to purchase one for wherever you're going. And one thing that's seems to be popular now is that companies will do like a pay-as-you-go or pay-as-you-sail kind of service, where they will purchase only the charts that they need electronically for that particular voyage plan, and then once the voyage plan is done, those charts get deleted. However, what happens if you're in a blackout situation and you don't have access to your electronic navigation is unreliable, which is something that I'll touch on later. Or let's say that you require a technical manual for the main engine and you are currently dead in the water. There is no main engine online. How do you restore yourself from a total power blackout if you don't have the required information to do so?
Yeah, and that's, a lot of industries right now are kind of coming to the realization that even though they're going digital, they do have to have that backup plan of going manual, and that means having the personnel, having the charts in a manner, whether they're only whether they're hard copies like you talked about, or they're in some other means. I have some pilot friends, a very similar situation. We're talking about navigation charts and other things, and they everything that they have now, they used to carry around bags. I remember my buddies having bags and bags of all the things that they needed to for all the airports they were going to be flying into. They'd have all the hard copies of everything, but now that it is all moved to, it's on an iPad, and that's kind of better because it's easier. It doesn't flop around, and it's easier to access and search through things. But at the same time, if the systems are down, they don't have access to it. So they've gone to backups where they have their own personal devices where they've downloaded those, and they have subscriptions to some of these services. So that's some of the ways that the pilots have chosen to address some of their corporate issues associated with these types of things. So it's interesting to see that you're coming up with the same concerns on the Maritime.
Certainly, and don't get me wrong, this is a good start. They certainly did consult the correct people as far as consulting ICS Cert and working off of a proven NIST framework was really good. And you'd think that that would be a really positive thing. However, could you hit the next slide?
Yes, sir.
Compliance with this regulation is voluntary. Well, compliance with the framework they put out is voluntary. So let's see what the International Maritime Organization has to say. So the International Maritime Organization is a subcommittee of the United Nations, and their authority is based on a treaty that has well over 100 signatory countries. And that treaty says if you want to do trade with us, you need to follow certain regulations. And those regulations can be safety regulations, maritime pollution laws fall underneath IMO. But more recently, in 2017, they enacted MSC 42898. It's also been nicknamed IMO 2021 within the industry. It states that safety management systems, they need to account for cybersecurity risks, and you have no later than the first annual document of compliance verification, so basically your first audit, after January 1st, 2021. And you can't be reflagged. Now, the law of flag states that you are protected by the laws of a country, and you're allowed to move cargo under the protection of that country. So to not be flagged, you basically don't go anywhere until you get flagged. Even North Korea flags their own ships. I can't think of anyone who's sailing around without underneath some sort of flag. Next slide. Here's actually the exact language of this. There's a bit of legalese here, but I think that the most important part, could you hit the next slide, is this line right here, which this is kind of safety management systems should take into account cyber risk management. That's very loose. That's not really that doesn't really tell companies to use a certain framework to take certain action in order to ensure that they're addressing the cyber risk issue. It really just says if you put into your international safety management, your safety management system, we are dealing with cybersecurity issues, then you're more or less in compliance according to the letter of the law here. I'm not a lawyer, so I wouldn't take that to the bank, but that's my impression.
Yeah, I see. I read a lot of looseness into this. When I just that first statement, part of that statement right there, safety management systems. So, do you know of how they identify specific devices that are associated with the safety management system? Is that everything, or is that something specific?
So the safety management system is really a series of procedures for addressing safety on board the ship. So the vessel security plan is a big part of it. Also, I believe safety of life at sea also factors into it. So all of your safety equipment needs to be accounted in your safety management system, but it's a big group of paperwork that says I am in compliance and here's how I'm in compliance, and it shows safety inspections, safety equipment on board, who does what in case of an emergency. It's checklists.
Yeah, so this is where we get into that nomenclature issue. Just because there's system on there doesn't mean that they're talking about management systems, servers and software. This is actually a function of the actual ship itself and some of the things that are performed on it.
Correct.
Interesting. Yes, I made that mistake right off the bat, and I'm sure many other people are going to make that mistake too.
Of course.
You ready?
Yes.
Awesome.
So unfortunately, it does get more challenging from here. The ICS frameworks, the ones on shore were kind of developed in an opposite situation where the power plants were originally going to be networked. They started to be networked, and ICS CERT and NIST came in and said, you guys are critical infrastructure. You should really be secure, and you have these networks out there. So let's do something about this. And actually, they worked together very well, and they came up with NIST 853, which is an excellent system. However, most shipboard systems were never originally designed to be networked at all. It's really not even ad hoc, it's post hoc. And companies could unfortunately use this loose terminology of cyber risk accountancy as an excuse to network without stopping and thinking this is critical infrastructure too. So, next slide. Still more challenges. These frameworks, they encourage more OT connectivity for active monitoring. This is initially a challenge because there isn't a standard framework being pushed. If there were a standard framework where they said you have to be in compliance with this framework, and it was a good framework, then this probably wouldn't be as much of an issue. But if people are allowed to kind of come up with whatever they want to, this could cause issues. You could end up with more connectivity without any protections. And with an aging fleet, this really means just kind of almost shadow IT stuff going on as far as networking stuff together, which can obviously cause problems.
Yeah, the shadow IT is a challenge for just about every sector on here. When we're talking about so you've mentioned several times the NIST 853, and were you aware of the 800 or 882 R2, which are the caveats for control environments associated with the 53 guidelines?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll talk about that after this. And it just gives some considerations for OT environments. And obviously, I would consider that for ships. Some of the things that operators and engineers, some of the choices that they make, helping to understand that those things can't be changed within these working environments, but still encouraging following the path of the 853 and other types of guidelines.
Sure. So there is some hope on the horizon, namely that there are standards that exist. I mentioned the NIST 853. So the Maritime Specific Cybersecurity Framework Profile is based heavily on that. That is the one that the U.S. Coast Guard recommends. There's also a framework called BIMCO, which was behind a paywall, so unfortunately I couldn't look over that. But also the Digital Container Shipping Association seems to have taken some elements of NIST 853 and really adapt good presentations which are aimed at the crew and ship operators. So it's really they really are trying to bridge that gap, which is good. I also noticed after some searching online that maritime cybersecurity companies do exist, and I think that that's actually a very important point because the existence of those companies suggests that there are clientele who are also concerned about this issue. Because if the clientele didn't exist, then these companies wouldn't exist. And to be fair to the U.S. Coast Guard and Department of Homeland Security, they are actually taking cybersecurity more seriously every day. It's just that we still have a way to go. Next slide. So, race against time, which is a little sky is falling, but it's not really falling. These are all cybersecurity attacks. The vast majority of these were entirely within the IT space and not on the OT space. I think only one of these attacks on this list actually even occurred on a ship. The rest, keep in mind that there are a lot that are going unreported, I'm sure, because if you notice this list, a lot of these are European companies who have very strict laws about reporting cybersecurity incidents. I noticed that, and the lack of any other continent on here is a little
Suspicious?
It's suspicious to say the least. So, and the Coast Guard has warned of certain incidents that have happened. You can look up these documents online on the Coast Guard website. The Marine Safety Information Bulletin from April 2019.
Hmm.
It specified a phishing attack and a safety alert back in June of 2019. Specified a situation that occurred on a ship as it was coming into port. So not an ideal situation to have things wig out on you.
Now you were in the industry. I mean, you've been in this industry for a while, and I know that NotPetya had a huge impact on Maersk, and but that was from a shoreside standpoint, and I guess the ships couldn't go places. Was there ever any concern? What did you have any experience with NotPetya while you're out on ship?
So I personally didn't have any experience on NotPetya while I was out on ship. Um, I was home at the time, but obviously I heard stories of people dealing with the fallout from that. Luckily, there was nothing that happened on board, at least as far as like a direct action. The rest was more supply chain issues. Like you mentioned, they really couldn't go anywhere until they got orders about where to go. And also there was, I think there was some issues about getting supplies to the ship where they had to go through
Oh yeah.
locals instead of getting stuff shipped internationally to them as far as
Yeah,
supplies go.
and yeah, I've had those experiences while I was in the Marine Corps on Navy ships and stuff like that, being anchored just offshore, looking at everything, looking at all the lights and stuff like that, and not being able to go on shore, waiting for helping when the supply ships came in. So yeah, that's pretty interesting, and I'm glad you didn't have any adverse experience on that. So, you ready for the next one?
Yes.
Awesome.
So it's funny. They, despite being terrified of getting hacked, they're inviting opportunity to be hacked by introducing more automation, and also potentially autonomous ships. Autonomous ships seems to be technology that is well on its way. Um, how realistic it is to see a major ocean liner having their whole fleet be autonomous, I don't know if we'll ever see that, to be honest. Um, but there have been some interesting trial runs. So there was a ferry in Finland back in December 2018 that Rolls-Royce claimed ran completely autonomously. The IMO has approved interim guidelines for testing autonomous ships, which is really opens up the gates as far as legislation is concerned about getting someone to sign off on the fact that there isn't a physical person driving, like on the ship driving it. Um, China is currently setting up a 225 square mile test zone for the testing of autonomous vessels. And actually, not too long ago, back in October, there were licensed mariners who were sitting in a Boston control room, and they were controlling a ship off the coast of Denmark. And actually, you can see that is a picture of them doing that, and you can see the ECDIS, which is the electronic uh, chart navig. Sorry. Is there any way to not have to do the whole slide over? I can do the whole slide over.
Okay.
Or autonomous ships and automation. So autonomous ships, they're coming someday. Probably not tomorrow. Probably not next year. There's a ferry in Finland. Back in December 2018, Rolls-Royce did a demonstration of that ferry where it went between 2 points. They claimed it was the first autonomous ferry in the world. The International Maritime Organization has set forth some laws about what you need to do in order to test autonomous ships, which is super interesting. China is currently setting up a 225 square mile test zone for testing of autonomous ships. And actually, if you look at this picture right here, this is a picture of licensed mariners in Boston. So we'll watch standing officers um, controlling a ship that is off the coast of Denmark.
See,
and they
that's
did a
that's
small
that's
wedge.
almost not fair. I've been on
Yeah.
ship, I've seen people driving ship and they're way too comfortable, all laid back.
Well, I mean, I never drove the ship, so I was
I never
never I
drove
was
the
never
ship
quite
either,
that laid
but
back.
it's
Yeah.
it's way too comfortable to me.
But if you'll notice that they only have a couple of small like live feeds there. Maybe they can blow them up. Maybe those are actually really great cameras that they have on there. But for the most part, it looks like they're navigating through ECDIS, which I'm going to talk about in a second. Actually, on the next slide. So ECDIS is the electronic chart display and information system. One of the things that you find out very quickly about ECDIS is that it is trivial to spoof, trivial to abuse. Now, this doesn't mean that someone else can change your information. However, you can change your own information because you voluntarily broadcast to the other surrounding ships, and that data eventually makes its way back to shore. And you can actually go on websites such as vesseltracker.com and I believe marinetraffic.com and follow these vessels all over the world. It's very interesting. It's very cool. But there have been countries who have gotten in trouble for smuggling operations dealing with changing their ECDIS through the automatic identification system. So this is actually an excerpt from a UN Security Council report, which is tracking a North Korean ship skirting uh, skirting sanctions, international economic sanctions.
Interesting.
So, and all it had to do is just edit. In this case, I think it turned it off, but then later it edited it when it turned it back on, claimed it was a different ship. So,
Interesting.
next slide. There are other risks to navigation as well. Big one that everyone has been talking about for quite a while now is GPS spoofing. This, as far as I could tell, it first appeared in pop culture with Tomorrow Never Dies in 1997 James Bond movie. Basic premise is convince the ship somewhere that it's not. So this image here is from a very good report from C4ADS called Above Us Only Stars. It's all about GPS spoofing in Eastern Europe. As you can see here, there are ships that are out at sea, and all of a sudden they zoom onto land, and it looks like they're at the airport when obviously they're not. They're not at the airport. Uh, so if you end up in a situation like this, and you are in a traffic situation, you're transiting a strait or something like that, and all of a sudden your electronic navigation is no longer reliable, it's really important to have the ability to go back to paper charts. So next slide. It gets weirder. You're now entering the twilight zone here because no longer is GPS spoofing. It seems to be something where all the contacts move to a single point, which is the point of interference. But there's also these newer versions of GPS spoofing that has been spotted throughout the world called GPS crop circles, or it's also been called circle spoofing if you want to Google that. It's very fascinating. So the top image is from, again, C4ADS, charting various GPS trackers, and you can see that all of a sudden they all congregate onto a ring. Um, this this is also present in Strava data, so like Fitbit trackers and fitness trackers, they all have GPSs in them. And instead of everything being drawn to a single point where it's very easy to figure out where the interference is coming from, all of a sudden it's drawn to a circumference. I have no idea how this is being done. I don't know of anyone who knows how this is being done. It's very strange, and it's a brave new world. So maybe someday we'll learn exactly what's going on.
So this is the top image right there, the one that's active. That's from the C4 ADS report, and then this bottom right hand one, that's from the Strava report, right?
Uh, yes. So that's data from
Or
Strava. Yes.
interesting. Yeah, I mean, because that kind kind of I can see the road that's kind of going down through it, and so the first one's GPS data, but then the other one's from a completely separate source. I guess I would assume at the same time or at another testing time. But it always amazes me how relevant Strava data is in so many proving or showing so many things. So that's really interesting.
So next slide. The main takeaways of this is that cybersecurity for OT shipboard networks, the sky isn't falling yet. Things are not networked enough that an asymmetric attack is really feasible as far as shipboard OT networks are concerned. If things get networked and it's done carelessly and there are no controls in place, things could potentially get really bad. The US has a real opportunity to lead the world in this, but we need to modify our existing frameworks to have them deal a little bit better with shipping as an industry. We should also firm up our laws. Compliance is voluntary. It doesn't really do it for me. And IMO has spoken, and compliance is kind of voluntary for them too. So more automation is coming. Ships are becoming more automated every day. And the only way through is to take the threat seriously. And now normal GPS spoofing is apparently it's now old hat, but it can still be very disruptive if you end up in navigable waters. So thank you.
Yeah. I mean, this is I think that since you're working in the maritime and as a part of the information security teams that are helping with the OTs, the ICS OT, whatever you want to call it, side of this industry, I think you're in a really exciting field sector, and all of these things. Everybody is kind of dealing with these same types of issues as they're considering the updates to their different sectors, but every sector has slightly different consequences and risks, requirements for actual service. Every time you're talking, I'm thinking about the satellite communications and availability of systems when you're just walking around the ship, and knowing that a lot of the ship is physically controlled, but still a lot of people go through there when you're at port, doing different maintenance for different systems. And there's a lot of opportunities. And you pointing out the crop circles, and the new innovative ways people are thinking about disrupting things, whether it's the GPS or whether it's some of the other information about the ship's locations and status and so forth. That's all really interesting to me. So
thank you for having me on. There's some contact info if you need to reach me at all. You can reach me at aaron.christopher.sawyer@gmail.com. My LinkedIn, so the URL that you can do for custom URL at the end of linkedin.com/in/not-a-sock-puppet. That's me.
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Aaron, I really appreciate you taking the time out to kind of pull all of this information together, introduce us to some of the current concerns for the maritime sector. There's so much more to delve into, understanding the different components on the ships, the communications and so forth. Like I said, you've got your challenge cut out for you, and yeah, I'm really excited for you. And so thank you very much for introducing us to this.
Thank you.
All right. You have a great day, sir.
You too. Bye now.
Thank you for tuning in to another concept overview with the SANS ICS and Cutaway security teams. Please let us know if there are other topics you would like us to cover in the comments below. If you enjoyed the content, please be sure to like and subscribe to the SANS ICS YouTube channel. This has been Don C. Weber of Cutaway Security. Go forth and do good things.